Welcome to a case study in restoring historic city and county buildings, a discussion on the Old Courthouse Center in Woodstock, Illinois. Today's speakers are Ashley Sarver and Darrel Moore. Ashley is a principal urban planner at Studio GWA, where she assisted with the financial analysis and scenarios for the Old Courthouse Center, as well as the historic tax credit consulting. Darrel is the city planner for Woodstock, Illinois, and a large portion of his first 4 years in the role centered around planning for and coordinating the rehabilitation of the Old Courthouse Center. He was integral to the project team from the beginning of the project through completion. Ashley, I will go ahead and throw it over to you.
Great, thank you. We're excited today to talk about a project that's been in the works for many years, and obviously has been standing even longer than that. So we'll dive right in. As Amanda mentioned, I'm Ashley Sarver. I'm with Studio GWA. For this project, we worked on the architectural services for the shell of the building, but also on the tenant build outs. We also did the historic tax credit consulting, interior design, and we also provide development services. So we'll talk a little bit about those services as we walk through things today, but I'll hand it over to Darrel here to introduce himself and a little bit about the City of Woodstock's role.
Thank you. Yeah, I am Darrel Moore. I'm the city planner for the City of Woodstock. And as Amanda said, I'd been involved on this project for a number of years, actually dating back to when I was first hired about 6 years ago. This was right on my plate. And so the city, from a broader perspective, the city has been working with Studio GWA for a number of years, actually all the way back to when the city acquired the building 10 or 12 years ago. And Woodstock has taken on the atypical role for a municipality as owner and developer of a major historic preservation rehabilitation project. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, how we did it, and hopefully some things that other people can take with them too.
And Darrel's being modest, but I think it'd be great if you talked a little bit about the awards that this project has won since its completion, just since those have been in the news lately, and a great boast for you all.
Yeah, so you'll see some badges there in the bottom right corner. We were a finalist for the Chicago Building Congress Merit Awards for this project. We were a winner of the Illinois Landmarks Illinois Preservation Awards for 2024, and also an unexpected surprise for us is that the International Economic Development Council held awards in which our project was named the best among all submitted entries. There were more than 400 entries. And they singled ours out as an exemplary project, and we're very excited about the recognition we've been getting for this work.
Great, thank you. In the next few slides, we'll see some befores and afters, and so I'll just kind of point out a few things about these, the project. This is a before photo. You can see that it's still in decent condition. It's not like it's folding in on itself, but it also was in need of some love after many years of sitting unmaintained. So some of the things you notice here that I'll just point out between here and the next photo is to pay attention to the dome, pay attention to the cornice and the paint schemes. As I move to the next photo, you'll see we worked with the city to restore that dome. We added the corbels back into the cornice of the main courthouse building. And then on the paint scheme of the sheriff's house, which is this smaller, lighter brick building to the right, really went back to a more historic theme paint scheme. And these things may look cosmetic, but they really are critical in maintaining and for the life of the building. Moving to this next after shot, just a beautiful view really of how this building stands on the corner and really anchors the downtown, which Darrel will talk more about the role that this building has played as a civic asset, but just a really strong presence there on the corner. I think one of the most dramatic changes too is really on the back end of the courthouse. And it's always challenging with buildings that occupy such a strong presence because there's really no back of house to this building, or there's no great place to put it. So we had to get creative design wise. You can see in this before photo that a lot of those additional back of house uses are stationed here in the back. We have the fencing that's shielding some of that. We have the garage. But we wanted this building to become, have our main entrance there on the back end. So you see this addition in the middle that marries the two buildings, that helps try to blend the traditional architecture with this new addition. And this addition served as, our accessible entrance. So we have an elevator in here that helps get to all the different floors of the building, navigating amongst 7 different changes in grade to be able to provide an accessible entrance for the public to enter the building. And you can see too then just some of those back of house features. You have to try to blend them away and make them disappear into the background because this was the main entrance. So some interesting challenges there, and I think it was executed pretty well. Darrel, anything to add about this change on the exterior?
Well, like you said, a big challenge of this project has been the fact that this takes up a very small city block, but still a city block, visible on all sides. We had to we couldn't hide our mechanicals very easily, although we did, and we took a lot of care with every elevation of this building, and it's, as you said, this is the new accessible entrance on the back, something that the building never had before, which is a great way to make sure that this is a community-minded space, open to all.
Mm-hmm. Some on the interior, and these are just again some befores and afters. This was the main entrance off the square, and we see some more some tile in there that has seen better days, and really we're not seeing in this photo the degree to which we had a lot of flaking paint, and so in this area you see the modern introducing back some of these other features of the wood flooring, going with a more neutral palette, a paint palette for this building. And so this acts as the main entrance off the square, but also you enter into a main corridor and can either go up up to the stairs to the event space, or on this first floor. Darrel, can you share a little bit about what's on the first floor of the courthouse building?
So we designed it to be spaces for retail shops, including micro retail. We developed an incubator program where we were trying to encourage small businesses to come in and move into these one-room little former county offices. The main space, which is visible through the doorway, is currently the Chamber of Commerce office and their visitor welcome center for Woodstock. And you're still seeing a lot of great details that we were able to preserve and enhance as a part of this this project, including that hand-painted safe door. That one dates back to about 1904 on the right side. Got the original banister coming down from upstairs, and the tin ceiling, which was painstakingly restored and recreated as needed. So this is the main entry, as you said, for people coming in off the square, and it really presents itself very well as a welcoming space.
This was one of the trickier spaces. This is the old courtroom, and you see all this framing here, really helping hold up the ceiling. So this is one of the spaces that you can see the potential, but when you first walk in, it's not exactly the courtroom that it used to be. And so bringing it back to what is now event space and wide open space, some of those features that were brought back was key key detailing on the ceiling. You can see that the original stencil was used. We took that when we did a paint analysis and then reintroduced that stenciling with a different paint scheme, something a little bit more neutral here, but showing that off once again as a real feature of the space. And so, you know, you walk into this space and the floor is pretty neutral, but the ceiling really sings. And it's really quite cool to see that have and be the main feature. And in the background a bit, you see what was the judges' chambers, which now acts as a bar. So a good use of additional space that we had here to be able to serve the space a little bit more. Darrel, anything else to add on the courtroom?
Well, I think it's always fun to point out that those two lighted circles up on the ceiling are functional as well as decorative, and they always have been, and with rehabilitation continue to be. The reason for the very high 20-foot ceilings in this room is that this is a pre-Civil War building, air conditioning not around at that time, so they used tall rooms to help heat rise in the warmer months, and those circles in the ceiling were actually vents that could be opened up to allow that air to go into the attic and up through the cupola and out of the building. And so that's a nice touch. And when we did the rehabilitation, that's still a part of the air intake system. We converted that, and so it was very nice to keep both the decoration and the functionality in that.
Sure. Really just, you know, noticing one, how great the building stock is in downtown Woodstock, all there around the square, and also then the presence of the courtroom or of the courthouse and sheriff's house building there. In this photo, it shows it still with the white dome, but like Darrel mentioned, it's a full city block, and so it really has a strong presence in the city of Woodstock. Darrel, I hand it over to you to talk about just how much of a role it's played for various things in your community.
Yeah, so the downtown, as you can see in the last photo, is really it's a traditional square. The courthouse anchors the western side. Woodstock, for those who don't know about us, we're about 55 miles northwest of Chicago. We are primarily, well, are we primarily known? We are pretty well known for one thing in particular out of a lot of things that we could be known for, but that's Groundhog Day. And the main picture here shows us celebrating Groundhog Day this year with a few thousand people showed up before dawn to see the groundhog prognostication. There in the background is the courthouse. Actually, so I guess this is actually from 2 years ago. And it's the same backdrop that Bill Murray had when they filmed the movie here 30 years ago. So that's what a lot of people know Woodstock for, but we've got other things that are important, and they have a lot to do with the courthouse. And so here's the courthouse as it looked not long after it was built in 1857. And in the top right there, you're looking at the architect, John Mills Van Onsdale, who was is referred to as Chicago's first professional architect. He designed lots of important buildings in Chicago, including the City Hall there and some other places. In the bottom right, you see one of his other buildings that still remains standing in Illinois, and that's the Governor's Mansion in Springfield, still in use today. And so his role in this building is a part of what is given this regional significance. But we also have national significance. The jail was home to this man here, Eugene Debs, for about 6 months after he was put in jail following his involvement with the Pullman Railroad strike in the 1890s. He became a national figure during that strike and during his time in the jail. wrote letters that were published in newspapers and became quite a major figure, and also refined some of his ideas on his underlying philosophy, which was socialism, and went on to run for president under the socialist ticket, unsuccessfully 5 times. But his time in Woodstock was very formative for him. And as you can see with the gentleman in the illustration on the left, he was allowed to have a secretary to help him with his writing and correspondence, and he served a unique role. Also, his lawyer, who would defend him, Clarence Darrow, also tried one of his first cases in the courthouse several years before this. So that's provides some national significance, but locally, and perhaps most importantly, this building served as the backdrop for civic life in Woodstock, even social life for that matter. Here we've got the Woodstock City Band, which just recently has celebrated 140 years of summer performances. And this was also the place, where people would gather for lectures, where people worked, where important trials were held, and you can see some pictures through the years of office parties, and in the bottom left, getting ready for the tax bills to go out, and a jury on the right there, and the sheriff on top, and so there's a lot of life and history through the years in this building, and it was that way for over 100 years as the county owned the building and operated out of it. But by the early 1970s, the city had outgrown the building. They stopped investing in it, in its upkeep, because they knew they were going to leave. They were crammed for space. And in the bottom left, you see offices going up in the lobby. They were looking for office space wherever they could. But the county decided to move to the north side of town, the county administration. And so the building went on the auction block. That auction very nearly turned out pretty poorly for the city, because the main people who wanted to buy it were going to tear it down and build a parking lot. But thankfully, a group of local investors pooled their money and were able to outbid them by a few $100s and purchase the building for its first rehabilitation in private hands anyway. And what they did was they recreated this space into multiple spaces similar to what we've done again 40 years later, but it included any number of things: art galleries, a radio station, a department store, restaurant. But it was still the location where people came to for events, to hear speakers, and to have parties and celebrations. And it was all very important to the community. Unfortunately, as the years went on, the building was not being invested in. The ownership was unable to provide for its upkeep, and by around 2010, the building was in pretty bad shape, and the city decided to step in to take over the building, and hopefully fix it up a little bit and turn it back over into private hands. And some of the problems that the city immediately encountered and had to deal with was a deteriorating roof. It was crumbling stairs. It was broken windows held together with duct tape. The bottom middle is showing nesting material that filled the attic from years of pigeon habitation up there. And so the city has work cut out for it. But really the idea was, let's just get it cleaned up, make it safe, make it weather tight, and turn it over to someone else. However, as the process wore on, the city was not finding good proposals for what to do with the building. It's a very difficult building to work with, given its size and specifics. And so we thought it was important to conduct some studies. We reached out for help. Urban Land Institute Chicago came in, did a study. We did a study about with the Northern Illinois University Center for Governmental Studies, but most importantly, we brought in Studio GWA, then known as Gary W. Anderson Architects, to help guide us as to how to improve this building, what needed to be done, what needed to be done right away, what we could do with the building itself. And that whole process morphed into a question of, well, and I should say, because the city got to the point where it became clear that permanent ownership was going to be the only viable solution forward, the city was going to own it. The city was therefore going to have to fix it up, and we needed Studio GWA's help to guide us to how to do that.
Yeah, some of those first items we worked on, I mean, you see the drawing and the photo markup of the dome repair. You know, there was a look at stabilizing that. There was new windows put throughout the building, some stair repairs, some things that just needed to be done sooner rather than later while we worked through a bigger plan. And so we first started just exploring as many scenarios as possible, working with floor plans, working with Darrel and the Courthouse Commission of the desire for what this building should be going forward. And we looked at scenarios. This is showing, you know, I think we had scenarios A through F. We looked at a few different ones, and then sometimes it was, you know, B and a half, because we like some elements of this one, but not of that one. And so we use these floor plans as just ways to scope out what the space should be. And some of the things we heard from the commission was that there was still a desire for the public to be able to access the building, even if it wasn't a public building per se, that it had uses in it that would still welcome the public in to enjoy the space. So that was something that was part of our scenario planning, looking at different tenants. We also looked at a possibility of, could the courthouse stay public and the sheriff's house go private, and do we divide those out? Ultimately, we decided to keep those together. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can see we looked at, you know, phasing it. Do we do phase 1 this way and then phase 2 that way? And with all of those, we looked at various implications for cost. So one of the things that we dove into, or I should say, two at least, was looking at a conventional HVAC system and also looking at the building with geothermal and how that would perform over time, comparing upfront cost to long-term performance for both of those systems. And in the end, we ended up going with a geothermal system and kind of some unique pieces there that I think Darrel's going to talk about later. But the cost estimating, I think, really helped. And the key tool that was part of that analysis for the financials was looking at the historic tax credits as a financing source. This came around, you know, we knew it had the federal tax credits in hand. This was shortly after the state historic tax credits were introduced. So the timing really worked well on that. But one of the pieces that we knew we needed was for that state piece to come through. So just talking a little bit more about the tax credits here. A lot of projects in adaptive reuse and historic preservation can make use of the historic tax credits as a financing source. And we've really seen a lot of projects happen that otherwise would not have been touched. And those buildings would probably still be in a dilapidated state without the use of the tax credits. So they help close the gap on these financial stacks. They help reduce the risk, whether you're the owner or the lender or someone else involved with the financing of the project. Bringing in the historic tax credits really helps spread the risk and make it a little bit more comfortable for everyone involved. Should also know that they pair well with other incentives. You know, not necessarily in the case of the courthouse, but in other projects, you'll see that the tax credits work well with whether it's TIF funding, other grant sources through DCEO, or other sources like that. And in terms of the tax credits, they're versatile in who claims them, which comes into play with the courthouse, because you need to have a tax credit investor as part of that. And if you don't have the tax liability yourself, you bring in an investor to be a part of that. And that's a piece we'll talk through that the city worked through for this project as they set up their structure. So just kind of taking a step back on what buildings qualify for historic tax credits. First, it has to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And so that can be either via being individually listed as a landmark building, or if it's a contributing building within a larger National Register historic district. And those districts can vary in shape and size. You can see how downtown Woodstock has this historic look and feel to it, but also that the courthouse had enough presence on its own to be a landmark building. So you'll sometimes in a district, you'll have non-contributing buildings as well. Those would be not qualified for the historic tax credits. But it's important to know if you are in a district, it doesn't automatically mean that your building would qualify for the tax credits, because it does have to be contributing. Additionally, it could also be a district certified by the National Park Service for the purposes specifically of the federal tax program. And that one you don't run into quite as often, but every once in a while there'll be an area that is set up in that way. So some of the criteria for National Register listing, I think sometimes there's the conception that it must be a beautiful, ornate building, as the courthouse is, to qualify under architecture. But there's also the piece of just being tied to the development of the town. For example, in Aurora, Illinois, we helped with the setup of a National Register district that is based off its industrial past. It's a bunch of warehouses, but those warehouses were critical to how Aurora developed over time. So that is now a National Register historic district. And again, very utilitarian type buildings, but they all have a shared history. Similarly, if there are key events that happened in those buildings, or people that were there or associated with them, whether it's a famous architect or famous builder or person who lived there, those all play a role as well for National Register listing. I think we find a lot in Illinois, a lot of people claim, Abraham Lincoln once looked at their building and now it's historic. And so that doesn't quite cut it in terms of just looking at it, but there are some key buildings, of course, that are tied to Abraham Lincoln and are on the National Register. So looking at the types of tax credits and how it starts to play into the financial stack. In the case of the courthouse here, we have our total project costs on this building at almost $23 million. If we're looking at the federal credit, which is a 20% credit, we're taking the qualified expenses, which in this case is 17.6 million. So even though the total project cost was 23, not all costs will qualify for the credits. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in this case, we had $17.6 million of qualifiable expenses. We multiply that by 20%, which is our federal credit, to get our total credit amount, which is 3.5 million on the federal side. And on the state side, it's a 25% credit. In Illinois, it's both for the Illinois statewide credit as well as the River Edge redevelopment zone credit. And that's a 25% credit. However, in Woodstock, they had to go after the statewide credit given their location. And so there's a cap on that. So you'll notice that 17.6 times 25% is not 3 million. But for this program, there is a cap at 3 million for the credit. So you can see that this together, $6.5 million in credit, can really make a big impact on the financials of the project in terms of what you need to get a loan on for a remaining amount, or how much equity might need to go into the project. So again, I mentioned not all expenses qualify, but a lot of them do. There's really a good portion of those costs that will qualify, and that can even include demolition, as well as construction, things like roof repair, window replacement, really anything related to the envelope in hard construction is a qualifiable expense. Also, some of your soft costs, so your architectural fees, engineering fees, legal, permitting, your historic tax credit consulting, and your developer fee as well. So even how you pay yourself back or the developer over time is a qualified expense. Things that are not eligible, rooftop decks, that wasn't a case with the courthouse, but on some projects, you may want to introduce a rooftop deck. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it's not a qualifiable expense. Also, site work is not qualified, equipment and furniture, your acquisition costs, finance fees, and any additions. In the case of the geothermal, Darrel, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that because it is off-site in this project, but has been, able to make good use in the building.
For sure, yeah. The city, there are advantages to being in the city when doing a development. And one, if you have to have a city-owned parking lot across the street from your project, and you need a location for a geothermal field, that turned out to be a good solution for us. What also turned out to be good about it is that even though we didn't know going in, but on the backside we found out that so first of all, the improvements themselves were integral to the HVAC system, so therefore they qualified for historic tax credits to a degree, maybe not every aspect of it. But then the remaining portion, once installed, there was a federal energy tax credit or tax rebate on that for another $200,000 or $300,000 that we saw in the project. So that was a fun bonus at the end after we thought all the tallies were settled, and we got another influx of revenue there to help pay down the project. But in all, the most important part about the geothermal system for our project was, as I mentioned before, there is no hiding things on this site. Everything is visible. So in order to reduce the number of mechanicals and the size of the equipment to fit inside the building, we needed them to operate extremely efficiently, and the geothermal system provided us with that. Reduce the number of amount of equipment, and as a result, we should be operating at 40 to 60% higher efficiency than we would have been otherwise.
That's great. A couple of challenges with the tax credits, and depending on your project, these challenges might feel too much to take on, but I think they're worth kind of looking at early on to be able to understand what those are. And one thing to look at is just the project elements are restricted to meet the standards. So if you're going to replace windows, they need to be done in a historically sensitive way, matching historic profiles. If you're going to replace the flooring, we need to replace it as close as possible to what was originally there, or repair what was originally there. It's really trying to keep those elements that are historically significant to the building and keeping those intact. And so for some spaces, that's easier to do. For some, it's harder. And so that's just an element that if you want the tax credits, you have to follow those standards throughout. Additionally, it's a partnership for 5 years. So if you're bringing on a historic tax credit investor into your ownership structure to be able to take advantage of those credits, that's a partnership for at least 5 years. And so you just want to make sure that it's someone you want to partner with for 5 years. Additionally, smaller projects might limit potential investors. There is just in the marketplace a greater desire to see these larger projects and take those on. And so when it's a smaller project, the investor pool just shifts. It's not as many people in that pool. But we have seen some creative things done of, like with the Midtown Faust building, of bringing, a bunch of smaller community members together to take on those historic tax credits. That's not what was done with the courthouse, but that is something that for smaller projects can come into play. And really anything that's less than $5 million in credits is considered a small project. So there's a number of those if you're talking Main Street style buildings that are potentially eligible for the tax credits, but might run into this challenge. Additionally, the adequate tax liability, if you can't take them yourself, then again, it's bringing in that investor. The only program, and I mentioned earlier that the tax credits pair really well with most other incentives. The only one that I've seen someone run into a challenge with is with the SBA 504 loan, which is a loan from the Small Business Administration. And so that one has just come in as something to keep your head up for, just for any challenges with that one. And I'd say the other one would be just the state of the Illinois statewide credit right now. There's a $3 million cap per project, and it's a competitive program. So this was a piece that we worked with the City of Woodstock really early on, even in our financial analysis of saying, this one is competitive, it's not a guarantee. And from the city's perspective, it was critical to get the state credit. And so that competitive piece really came into play. And with their process for the state, it's kind of a three-part process. And the things that made Woodstock more competitive was trying to meet as many of the priorities as possible. And there are 5 priorities for your project. The more you meet, the better you can compete. And so those pieces are having been government owned for a period of time, which of course this one qualified for that. Having the family income be below the statewide family median income, partnering with a nonprofit. If there was a federally declared disaster, that's another one. And in that time, because of COVID, every county was a federally declared disaster. And then also being in a county that borders a state that has a statewide credit. So in this case, it was Wisconsin. So meeting as many of those priorities as possible was critical. And then from there, there's a little added additional challenge in that when you go to submit and they open the application for the next step, you need to be as quick as possible. The online application opens at 10 a.m. and really all of those applications come in within the first 30 seconds, if not 10 seconds. And so if you are neck and neck with someone who meets as many priorities as you want to try to get in as fast as possible. And I know when we were working on this with Darrel, we had people all over the place, submitting on behalf of this project. We had people here in our office. You had a number of people there at city staff, all just trying to get in as quickly as possible. And I think the winning one was, like three milliseconds or something like that. I think you might have been the winner on that one, Darrel, if I remember.
Yeah, each time, and we had to do it a second time because we didn't ask for the full 3 million the first time. Each time we got in less than a second, and we're the first overall submitter, which is just one less thing to worry about when you're wondering if you're going to get those funds.
That's right. Yeah. And hopefully over time we'll see, that the statewide program maybe doesn't operate this way going forward. We would really love to see a capless program and have more funds dedicated to this so that it's not as competitive and more projects can take advantage of using these financial tools. But we'll leave that for another webinar. Just real quickly on the federal application process. Again, it's a 3-part process for the state, but also for the federal. And the bulk of this is really, our part 1 is lining out the historic nature of the building, that it's a contributing building or contributes to the significance of the community. The part 2 is really the bulk of the work. This is where we're submitting photos of everything, interior, exterior. We're describing the current state of things and then describing what the future state will be, what we're going to be doing for flooring, how we're going to be treating woodwork, how we're going to be doing mechanical systems, any window repair, roof repair, anything related to the site as well. So that's the bulk of it, and that is paired with the architectural drawings. So kind of at a DD or construction document level, you need enough detail in there to be able to describe what you're going to be doing. And then in the part 3 is going through after the work is complete and saying, see, we photograph it and we show that we constructed it the way that we described. And then anything in between, we can submit an amendment if we need to have any changes that might come along the way. And then I just want to point out that we are following the standards for rehabilitation versus there are guidelines out there as well for restoration or reconstruction. So in this case, we're talking about taking a building and adaptively reusing it and rehabbing it. It's not a museum restoration. We're not trying to make, you know, in the case of the courtroom, we weren't trying to restore it to look like a courtroom. And so with the tax credits, you know, that's something that you could do if you wanted to go to that level. But the rehabilitation really allows different alterations that are able to help you with your new use for your building and bring it into modern use. And so we submitted that part 2, and that was approved. And really, there's a lot of different components to this building, given that we had technically 2 buildings, the courthouse and the sheriff's house, and then we also had this new addition. So there was a lot of different things to describe. We talked about how we would reuse pretty much everything, including the jail cells that are in the sheriff's house still today. Darrel, this is a very complicated financial framework. And I think this is the piece, you know, that a lot of people ask you about, just about how was the city able to be the developer for this project and make use of the tax credits. And this gives a glimpse of that, but I'll let you get into the nitty-gritty.
No, I think it's all right here. You can just see for yourself. No, all right, I'll explain it. So the key disadvantage that the city has as an entity without tax liability, no way to take advantage of those historic tax credits to monetize them. And so a partnership was needed with an investor, working through our accountants that we hired for this project, who had worked in this field of historic preservation and historic tax credits. We were able to get some proposals in, and we selected one from PNC Bank, and they became our primary investor. We weren't sure if we were going to need 2 different investors, one for state credits, one for federal, but because they have a presence in Illinois and they're a federal institution, federal or nationwide institution, then they were able to take all of our tax credits. So that's great. So basically, on our side of things, the city partners with our preservation fund, not for profit, that we control, and we had to create 2 more new entities. One was the managing member entity. So those 3 form a triangle there on the left of city-controlled entities, and then PNC agreed to be a part. So the managing member and PNC Bank are a partner in the newly formed Woodstock Courthouse LLC, the actual owner of the building. PNC doesn't want to be involved in day-to-day stuff, so the managing member is in charge of making day-to-day decisions and things like that. So in turn, the bank it gives us money for which they are going to see tax credits paid out over 5 years back to them. A little bit of tax credits. This actually, we probably could have updated this, because we found that we thought initially that we needed to see some of those tax credits come to the managing member, but I think 100% was able to go to PNC. And so So the structure of it all coming together is the city owns the building. It donates the building through its partner organizations into the overall LLC. It includes financing, which was a city municipal bond, plus all the investment already made in the building. Before this all got started, the city had already invested over $3.5 million into its improvement, which we were able to roll into the overall pool of money that was eligible for historic tax credits, even though that happened all before this setup was in place. And then the idea is that those things would be, all the costs that the city had would be offset by the partnership investment and then paid back over time through rents from tenants into the tenant spaces that we put into the building.
Pretty simple.
Pretty simple. It's all right.
I guess apart from that complicated structure, and just, you know, a good time to mention that it's always good to have advisors, you know, having your accountants and your legal team lined up to discuss these things even early on to make sure that there's not something that's going to happen 5 steps down the road that are going to negate the use of the tax credits or any other financial source. So good to have those CPAs along the ride with you for this.
Yes, yes, and a qualified, experienced architecture firm like yourself, and a law firm that specializes in it as well, and a construction company that also has a lot of experience. All those things we relied a lot on a lot of people, a lot of agencies. I mean, the city, to be a developer, that meant the city stepping outside of its comfort zone. It meant asking a lot of help. It meant dedicating thousands of hours of city staff's time, as it turned out, over the course of a couple years of this project. But all of that probably, well, that's just getting started on challenges as city developer. We also,
yeah, with your construction team, I mean, that's
yeah,
one piece too that even if we get an approved part 2 where we're describing everything and how we plan to do it, once you start construction, surprises pop up, and having a team and a construction group that's familiar with the historic nature of buildings is really pretty critical, because you could do something in construction that would negate getting those tax credits, which of course would really really alter things in terms of the financial stack. So critical all around to have these members of your team who have experience. What other challenges did you face as developer?
well, first of all, there was a big learning curve. The city as developer means that we've got a lot of very smart people here working in the city, but we've never done anything like this before. So um, we got good people that we on our team to do this, as I mentioned before. But it also means that maybe we probably would have done some things differently if we were starting over. You talk about changes to part 2. Some of those changes were unforeseen circumstances. Some of them were we had a lot of people involved in this project, and our bosses are city council members and the mayor, and if they have ideas for changes, things morphed over time, even as the project was underway, and that also added some unanticipated costs. So it can be a challenge to, I mean, it can be a challenge to work for politicians, but those politicians represent the city, and it's both a strength and a challenge to have a full city behind you, because it means that we can do good things together that we can't do on our own, but it also means a fair amount of public scrutiny on all of our decisions. And when costs started to rise, that started to become something that we couldn't avoid. We had to deal with, you know, we had to answer for the project as it was ongoing, as the costs came in, as change orders came in, and that's an environment that a private developer does not need to worry about in most cases. And that's doesn't need to be something in the public eye and under that level of scrutiny, but that goes with the territory for a municipality. Yeah, so those were the main concerns outside of all those unexpected things. So, for example, here you've got a room that curiously was once all filled in with rocks and mortar, and we wanted to make it return to functionality again. We thought we could just excavate it. It turned out excavation was a lot more challenging than we thought, and it also turned out we couldn't get rid of all the rocks because they were supporting some of the upper floor. So what we ended up having is one of the most unique bathrooms in town now, that's outfitted with rock walls in the lower floor of the courthouse. We had lots of changes, surprises that happened. We found a fuel storage tank, a 20,000 gallon fuel storage tank buried in the back of the building. There's asbestos, and then there was more asbestos, and then you dig up another layer and there's asbestos behind it, we found. And then, yeah, other things that were just go hand in hand with any historic rehabilitation. You just don't know when you peel back a layer what you're going to find, and whether it's going to bring the ceiling down once you do, which is what we had also happen.
Or the time you found another floor underneath the floor you thought you were moving, and there just
Right,
happened to be another one and totally changed the grade of the space.
Exactly.
Yeah, those are all the challenges that are, true of any building. And I think, as you mentioned, it's particularly challenging, when the city is taking that on, but also really rewarding. And, any renovation project, there's going to be stuff that just comes along the way that you can't anticipate. And so that's why we always highly recommend carrying a contingency. Even once you get your final bid from your contractor, of knowing that there's going to be something else probably that we're going to find and need to address at some point. So this was a piece, on the, as we had construction changes, like Darrel mentioned, the ones we ran into, but also as different tenants came along, we had to update our part 2 information. When we started the project and submit that part 2, we didn't know everything about who was going to be filling the space and if they were going to want to keep the flooring as it was, or maybe they were going to do a different type of finish, or we were going to paint it a different color. So all of those pieces on tenant changes were submitted as amendments to the original. And so it's just keeping those in hand, and also knowing that we can't just submit it because it's additional information. It's submitting it and getting it approved, knowing that we can rightfully move forward and construct it the way that we were hoping. So that's sometimes something that comes up, and something that works pretty well too, of doing phases in your projects for historic tax credits. Phase 1 might include a first floor tenant, and phase 2 is a second floor tenant. And then maybe something changes, and all of a sudden the first floor wants to go in, or the second floor wants to go in before first floor, and just needing to alter that change of course, which you can do with the historic tax credits as well. This just shows, incorporating those jail cells into the tenant space of the brewery here, and really makes for some of the probably best Instagrammable moments in downtown Woodstock, of sitting in these areas and enjoying a beverage in the old sheriff's house. And that's really all that we have for you today. You have Darrel's contact info, mine, as well as our historic tax credit calculator. If you want to just do a quick glance at your project, filling in square footage, expected construction costs, and getting a sense of what those historic tax credits are going to come out for. But we appreciate your time today, and I'll turn it back over to Amanda to close us out.
Yep, just one more note. If you would like to learn more about the Old Courthouse Center project, you can visit our website at www.studiogwa.com. But we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.